My daughter Sarah smiled as she slipped my wedding ring off my finger. "It'll be safer with me, Mom," she said, locking it in her purse. 2 weeks later, a package arrived with my ring inside and a note that changed everything. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Thelma Martinez, and at 68 years old, I thought I'd seen enough of life to know who I could trust. After all, when you've raised 3 children on your own, worked double shifts as a registered nurse for 30 years, and built a life from nothing but determination and love, you develop a pretty good sense of people. Or at least that's what I believed until the day my whole world came crashing down around me. I wasn't always alone. My husband Roberto was my anchor for 23 beautiful years before pancreatic cancer stole him away, leaving me with 3 teenagers and a mortgage that seemed impossible. But I made it work. I always made it work. Sarah was 17 when her father died. Marcy was 15, and little Tom had just turned 13. Those were the hardest years of my life, watching my children grieve while trying to hold myself together enough to be their rock. Sarah was my responsible one, the child who stepped up when her father passed. She helped with her younger siblings, got straight A's, and never complained when I had to miss her debate competitions because of work. She was the one who held my hand at the funeral, who told me we'd get through it together. Maybe that's why it hurt so much more when the truth finally came out. I worked the emergency room night shift at Jefferson Memorial Hospital for 3 decades. My colleagues used to joke that I had treated half the city at some point. My hands had delivered babies, comforted the dying, and saved more lives than I could count. These same hands wore my wedding ring every single day, through latex gloves and hand sanitizer, through tears and laughter. That ring wasn't just jewelry, it was my promise to Roberto, my reminder that love endures even after death. In our neighborhood, I became known as the Cookie Lady. Every new family that moved onto Maple Street would find a basket of my homemade chocolate chip cookies on their doorstep within a week. When Mrs. Chen from 2 houses down broke her hip, I cooked meals for her family for a month. When the Thompson boy needed tutoring in biology, I spent my few free evenings helping him pass his exams. This was who I was, who I'd always been, someone who gave more than she took, who found joy in helping others. The assisted living facility wasn't my idea. Sarah had presented it as temporary just until she could renovate my house to be safer. She showed me brochures of Sunset Gardens with its manicured lawns and smiling residents playing cards. She talked about how I'd make friends, have activities, proper medical care on site. Her husband David nodded along, adding how worried they were about me living alone. The recent fall I'd taken in the bathroom had scared everyone, myself included. I remember the day I moved in, how Sarah had efficiently packed my life into labeled boxes while assuring me everything would be stored safely. She was so organized, so in control, just like always. When she suggested taking my jewelry for safekeeping, including my wedding ring, I hesitated. That ring hadn't left my finger since Roberto placed it there in 1978, but Sarah's eyes were so earnest, so concerned. "Mom, things go missing in these places. I'll keep it in my safe at home. You know I'd never let anything happen to Dad's ring." How could I have known that those caring eyes hid such deception? Life at Sunset Gardens Assisted Living wasn't what I had imagined it would be, but I made it work, just like I always had. My apartment was small but cozy, with enough space for my favorite armchair and the oak bookshelf Roberto had built for our first anniversary. Sarah had promised to bring more of my things once I was settled, though somehow that day never seemed to come. Still, I had my essentials. Family photos covering every surface, my mother's quilt on the bed, and my collection of mystery novels that kept me company during quiet afternoons. My days developed a comfortable rhythm. I'd wake at 6:30, a habit from decades of hospital shifts that my body refused to forget. First came my cup of English breakfast tea, always with one sugar and a splash of milk, enjoyed while working through the daily crossword puzzle. The newspaper was delivered right to my door, and I took pride in completing the puzzle in ink, rarely needing to cross anything out. By 8, I'd be dressed and ready for the communal breakfast in the dining hall, though I usually just had toast and fruit, saving my appetite for the lunch I'd prepare myself in my tiny kitchenette. The facility allowed residents to cook if they were able, and I insisted on making my own meals at least once a day. It kept me feeling independent, useful. On Wednesdays, I'd make a big batch of soup that I'd share with Harold from down the hall, a widower whose children lived in Seattle and rarely visited. We'd eat together while watching Jeopardy, competing to see who could answer more questions correctly. Harold was a retired history teacher, so he usually won, but I held my own in the science and medicine categories. Sundays were the highlight of my week. Despite Sarah's protests that it was too much work, I still insisted on hosting family dinner once a month. My grandchildren would pile into my small apartment, filling it with laughter and chaos. 8-year-old Emma would help me set the table while telling me about her soccer games, and 10-year-old Marcus would sneak tastes of whatever I was cooking, just like his mother used to do. Even teenage Ashley, Sarah's oldest, would put down her phone longs, enough to help me frost the chocolate cake I always made for dessert. I'd cook all day Saturday to prepare for these dinners. My famous pot roast with carrots and potatoes, green beans with almonds just the way Roberto had loved them, fresh rolls from scratch, and always that chocolate cake. The small kitchen would fill with steam and wonderful smells, reminding me of better days when my house was always full of family. Sarah would arrive early to help serve, though lately she seemed more interested in hurrying things along, checking her watch frequently and suggesting we switch to ordering pizza instead. Between these visits, I kept busy with facility activities. Tuesday was bingo, which I attended more for the social aspect than any hope of winning. Thursday afternoons meant the book club, where we were currently working our way through Agatha Christie's novels. I'd already read them all, but I enjoyed the discussions and hearing different perspectives. Friday mornings, I volunteered to read to residents in the memory care unit, sharing newspapers and magazines with those who could no longer manage it themselves. My modest savings account held $40,000, accumulated over a lifetime of careful budgeting and small sacrifices. It wasn't much, but it was enough to ensure I wouldn't be a burden to my children and could handle any medical emergencies. I checked the balance monthly, a habit from years of stretching every dollar. The small investment account Roberto had started held another $15,000, designated for the grandchildren's college funds. These numbers gave me comfort, representing security and independence. This was my life, simple, routine, but content. I had my family, my independence, and my memories. What more could an old woman need? The first sign that something wasn't right came on a humid Tuesday afternoon in early September. Sarah had stopped by for what she called a quick visit, though these drop-ins were becoming strangely frequent. She sat across from me at my small dining table, her manicured fingers drumming nervously on the surface while she sipped the coffee I'd made. There was something different about her energy that day, a restlessness that reminded me of when she was a teenager, trying to work up the courage to ask for something. "Mom, I need to update your emergency contacts at the facility," she said, pulling out a folder thick with papers. "But I'll need your bank account information too, just in case something happens and we need to access funds quickly for your care." I remember pausing, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. In all my years of nursing, I'd been the emergency contact for dozens of patients, and never once had I needed their bank account details. When I mentioned this to Sarah, she laughed, but it sounded forced, hollow. She explained that things were different now, more complicated, more regulated. The facility required it, she insisted, her eyes not quite meeting mine. What struck me as odd was how prepared she was. The folder contained forms I'd never seen before, documents with tiny print that made my eyes strain even with my reading glasses. When I asked to read through them properly, Sarah glanced at her phone and suddenly remembered an urgent meeting. "Just sign here and here, Mom. I've already read everything. You trust me, don't you?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. The facility director, Mrs. Patterson, made an innocent comment a few days later that lodged itself in my mind like a splinter. I'd run into her near the main office when she mentioned how fortunate I was to have such a dedicated daughter. "Sarah certainly negotiated aggressively about your payment plan," she said with a tight smile. "She was very particular about the billing arrangements. Most families just accept our standard terms." I tried to ask what she meant, but Mrs. Patterson was already being called away to handle some emergency. The word aggressively kept echoing in my head. Sarah had told me she'd simply submitted the paperwork, that everything was standard. Why would she need to negotiate anything? Then there were the phone calls. Whenever Sarah visited, her phone would ring constantly. She'd glance at the screen, her jaw tightening, before stepping out into the hallway to answer. Through the thin walls, I could hear her voice, tense and argumentative, though I couldn't make out the words. When she'd return, she'd wave it off as work stress, but Sarah worked in human resources at a dental office. What could be so urgent about scheduling and benefits paperwork? The strangeness extended to my questions about the house. Sarah had said renovations would take 3 months at most, but we were approaching month 2 with no updates. When I asked to drive by and see the progress, she always had an excuse. The contractors were behind schedule. The permits were delayed. It wasn't safe with all the construction. Her husband David would change the subject whenever I brought it up, developing a sudden fascination with the weather or sports. My younger daughter, Marcy, mentioned something peculiar during a phone call from Phoenix. Sarah had called her about some family financial matter, asking if she'd sign papers to help with my care. Marcy found it strange since she'd never been involved in my finances before. "Why would Sarah need my signature for your medical decisions, Mom?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. The most unsettling moment came when I asked Sarah about my ring. I missed its weight on my finger, the comfort of spinning it when I was anxious. Sarah's whole demeanor shifted. Her smile became fixed, artificial. "It's safe, Mom. Stop worrying so much. Don't you trust me to take care of things?" Trust. There was that word again, wielded like a weapon to silence my questions. I spent the next 2 weeks constructing elaborate explanations for everything that felt wrong, building a fortress of justifications to protect myself from the truth I wasn't ready to face. Sarah had always been my responsible child, the one who stepped up when her father died, the one who graduated summa cum laude from college while working 2 jobs. If she seemed stressed now, if she was being secretive about certain things, surely there was a reasonable explanation. Late at night, when doubts crept in like shadows, I would sit in my armchair looking at our family photos, reminding myself of who Sarah was. There she stood at her high school graduation, valedictorian, her face glowing with pride. There she was at her wedding, dancing with Roberto's picture because he couldn't be there to give her away. And there, holding baby Emma for the first time, tears of joy streaming down her face. This was my daughter, my firstborn, my helper. She wouldn't deceive me. When my friend Harold asked why I seemed distracted during our Jeopardy sessions, I heard myself making excuses that sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Sarah's just overwhelmed with work and the kids," I told him, watching Alex Trebek without really seeing him. "You know how it is, trying to manage elderly parents while raising teenagers. She's doing her best." Harold nodded politely, but I caught the concern in his eyes, the same look I used to see in my nursing colleagues when family members were in denial about a loved one's condition. I rationalized the financial questions as Sarah being thorough, perhaps overly cautious. After all, hadn't there been that news story about the elderly woman whose family couldn't access her accounts when she had a stroke? Sarah was just being prepared, thinking ahead, protecting me. When my hands shook slightly while writing this explanation in my journal, I told myself it was just too much caffeine. The renovation delays made perfect sense if I thought about it logically. Everyone knew contractors were unreliable, permits took forever, and unexpected problems always arose in older homes. The house was built in 1962. Of course, there would be complications. Sarah was probably trying to shield me from the stress of dealing with construction disasters. That's what good daughters did. They protected their aging mothers from unnecessary worry. During Sunday dinner, when 10-year-old Marcus innocently asked why Grandma's house looked empty when they drove by it last week, I watched Sarah's face carefully. She smoothly explained that she'd moved everything to storage to protect it from construction dust. "You know how Grandma's allergies are," she said, ruffling his hair. The explanation was perfectly reasonable. Why did my stomach clench when she said it? I even found ways to dismiss the strange phone calls. David's family business, a small marketing firm, had been struggling since the pandemic. Of course, there would be tense calls with clients, urgent financial discussions, stress about keeping everything afloat. Sarah was probably helping him navigate the difficulties while trying not to worry me with their problems. They were protecting me from their troubles, not hiding something from me. My ring, I told myself, was absolutely safer in Sarah's home safe than here at the facility. Just last month, Mrs. Wellington from the second floor had reported missing jewelry, though it turned out she'd simply forgotten where she'd hidden it. Sarah was right to be cautious. The ring was irreplaceable, not for its monetary value, but for what it represented. She was guarding my most precious possession. This was love, not theft. When the doubt became too loud to ignore, I would make Sarah's favorite excuses for her in my own mind. She'd been working so hard lately. The kids were at difficult ages. The economy was stressing everyone. She'd always taken care of me before, hadn't she? This was just a rough patch, a temporary period of strange behavior that would pass. But even as I desperately clung to these explanations, a cold truth was settling in my bones like arthritis. The truth has a way of refusing to stay buried, no matter how deep we try to hide it. Mine surfaced on a gray Thursday morning when the mail arrived with my monthly bank statement. I almost didn't open it, having checked my balance just 2 weeks prior. But something made me tear open the envelope while my tea grew cold on the kitchen counter. The numbers didn't make sense. I stared at them, removed my reading glasses, cleaned them carefully, and looked again. My savings account, which should have shown $40,000, displayed a balance of $12,342. Nearly $28,000 had vanished like morning mist. My hands trembled as I traced down the list of transactions. 3 large withdrawals, each for $9,000 to avoid federal reporting requirements, dated over the past 6 weeks. The signatures on the withdrawal slips were electronic, authorized through online banking I'd never set up. But there, in the memo lines, was something that made my blood run cold. Authorized by POA, power of attorney. I'd never signed any power of attorney documents. My mind raced back to that afternoon with all the papers Sarah had me sign, her rushed explanations, her impatience when I tried to read them. Had she slipped something else in between the facility forms? I pulled out my small filing box where I kept important documents, my fingers fumbling with the familiar folders. There, in a manila envelope I didn't recognize, were copies of papers I supposedly signed. The signature looked like mine, but something was off about it. Too perfect, too steady for someone whose hands had started developing a slight tremor. The document granted Sarah complete financial power of attorney, dated just 3 days after I'd moved into Sunset Gardens. The next discovery came when I called Charles Schwab about my investment account, the one Roberto had started for the grandchildren's education. The pleasant customer service representative cheerfully informed me that the account had been closed 6 weeks ago, all $15,000 transferred to an external account. "According to our records, you authorized this transfer in person at our downtown branch," she said. I hadn't been to downtown in 4 months. My laptop, which Sarah had insisted on setting up with better security, yielded more evidence when I finally figured out how to check the browser history she didn't know I could access. There were logins to my bank accounts at times when I was attending physical therapy or sleeping. Searches for how to transfer money with POA and elderly parent financial management that I'd never made. The computer had been used to access my accounts while I was at doctor's appointments that Sarah had driven me to, leaving my apartment empty. I found a receipt in my jewelry box tucked behind where my ring should have been. It was from a precious metals dealer, an appraisal form for my wedding ring dated just 1 week after Sarah had taken it for safekeeping. The estimated value was listed at $4,000, far more than Roberto had paid for it in 1978, but worthless compared to what it meant to me. At the bottom, in Sarah's distinctive handwriting, was a note: "Call when ready to sell." The facility billing records revealed another lie. When I requested a copy of my payment history from Mrs. Patterson's secretary, I discovered that my monthly fee was $3,000, not the $5,000 Sarah had told me. Where was the extra $2,000 going each month? The secretary mentioned that Sarah had specifically requested all billing correspondence be sent to her address rather than mine, to reduce your stress, she'd been told. My credit card statement, which I rarely used and barely checked, showed charges I didn't recognize. Expensive restaurants I'd never visited, online purchases shipped to Sarah's address, a payment to a contractor named Riverside Renovations that didn't exist when I called directory assistance. $3,000 here, $1,500 there, small enough to go unnoticed individually, but adding up to something significant. The evidence was overwhelming. Undeniable, crushing. My daughter was stealing from me. I confronted Sarah on a Sunday afternoon right after what would be our last family dinner together for a very long time. The grandchildren had left with David to get ice cream, a convenient suggestion from Sarah that I now realized was planned. She was clearing dishes, humming softly, playing the role of the devoted daughter so perfectly that for a moment I almost lost my nerve. "Sarah, we need to talk about my bank accounts," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She didn't even pause in her dishwashing. "What about them, Mom?" $28,000 is missing from my savings. My investment account is closed. You want to explain that? The plate she was washing slipped, clattering against the sink. She turned slowly, drying her hands on my kitchen towel, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. A coldness that made her look like a stranger wearing my daughter's face. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice had changed, becoming defensive, harder. I pulled out the bank statements, the forged documents, the receipt from the precious metals dealer. I laid them on the table like evidence in a court case, which I supposed it might become. "Don't lie to me, Sarah. Not anymore." For a moment she maintained the facade, her face a mask of concern. "Mom, you're getting confused. This is why we moved you here, remember? You're not tracking things properly anymore." "There's nothing wrong with my mind," I shot back, anger finally breaking through my disbelief. "You forged my signature. You stole my money. You were going to sell my ring." The mask finally cracked. Sarah sank into a chair, but instead of remorse, her face twisted with frustration. "Fine. Yes, I took the money, but it's for your own good, Mom. You don't need all that cash sitting there doing nothing." The words hit me like physical blows. "For my own good? You're 70 years old. What do you need $40,000 for? You're in a nice facility. Your needs are met. That money is better used by your family, by your grandchildren." She was actually trying to justify it, her voice rising with self-righteousness. "That money was my security, my independence," I whispered, tears burning my eyes. "How could you?" Sarah's laugh was bitter, ugly. "How could I? Do you know what it's like trying to manage everything? David's business is failing. Ashley needs college tuition. The mortgage is underwater, and you're sitting on all that money like some dragon on a pile of gold, money you're never going to use. So you just took it? Like I'm already dead?" "You're being dramatic," she snapped, standing abruptly. "It's family money anyway. Dad would want his grandchildren to have it. Your father would be ashamed of you, I said quietly, and something in Sarah's face finally cracked. Well, Dad's not here, is he? She screamed, years of resentment suddenly pouring out. He's been gone for 20 years, and you've been playing the martyred widow ever since. Poor Thelma, raised 3 kids alone, worked so hard, sacrificed so much. Do you want a medal? I sacrificed too. I gave up my teenage years helping you, and what did I get? Nothing. I gave you everything I had, I said, my voice breaking. Everything wasn't enough. She grabbed her purse, shoving papers inside. The house is already sold, by the way, closed last week. The renovation story was just to keep you from asking questions. Tom and Marcy signed off on it, thinking they were helping with your care. The money's already spent, so don't bother trying to get it back. My house? You sold my house? The room seemed to spin. You're too old to manage property anyway. This place is perfect for you. 3 meals a day, activities, medical care, you should be grateful. She headed for the door, pausing only to deliver one final blow. And don't think about calling Marcy or Tom. I've already told them about your confusion, your paranoia. They think dementia is setting in. Who's going to believe you over me? The door slammed, leaving me alone with the shattered pieces of my heart. The full scope of Sarah's deception unraveled like a cancer diagnosis, each new discovery worse than the last. After she stormed out, I sat in my apartment for hours, numb with shock, until Harold knocked on my door with concerns about the shouting he'd heard. It was Harold who suggested I call my other children immediately, before Sarah could do more damage with her lies. Marcy answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and cheerful from Phoenix. Mom, I was just thinking about you. How are the renovations going? What renovations? I asked, my heart sinking. On your house. Sarah said you needed major foundation work and new plumbing. That's why Tom and I signed those papers to help with the construction loans. My stomach dropped. Marcy, honey, what papers? The silence on the other end stretched painfully long. When Marcy spoke again, her voice was uncertain. The papers to authorize the repairs. Sarah said you were getting confused about the details, that the stress was too much for you. She said you'd asked her to handle everything. I called Tom next. My youngest, my baby boy, now a successful accountant in Boston, had a similar story. Sarah had told him I was showing signs of dementia, forgetting important dates, making poor financial decisions. She'd presented herself as the responsible sibling stepping up to manage my affairs. The papers he'd signed weren't for renovations. They were consent forms agreeing that I needed financial supervision. She had medical documentation, Mom, Tom said, his voice shaking. Reports from a Dr. Hoffman stating you had moderate cognitive decline. It looked completely legitimate. Dr. Hoffman. I'd never heard that name in my life. My actual physician, Dr. Patel, confirmed my suspicions when I called his office the next morning. No cognitive evaluation had ever been ordered or performed. The medical documents were complete forgeries, sophisticated enough to fool my children, but fraudulent nonetheless. The investigation into my finances revealed a conspiracy that had been months in the making. Sarah had been planning this since before moving me to Sunset Gardens. Through careful manipulation and forged documents, she'd managed to obtain power of attorney not just over my bank accounts, but over my entire estate. The papers I'd signed that rush day weren't facility forms. They were carefully disguised legal documents that gave her complete control. My house, the home Roberto and I had bought in 1979, where we'd raised our children and built our lives, had been sold for $380,000. Sarah had told Tom and Marcy that I'd agreed to sell it to pay for specialized memory care. The closing documents showed their signatures, obtained under false pretenses, believing they were helping their confused mother. The money had already been dispersed, some to pay off Sarah and David's mounting debts, some to purchase a new BMW that Sarah had apparently desperately needed, and a large sum invested in David's failing business. The assisted living facility records showed more deception. Sarah had enrolled me in the basic care package while telling me I was receiving premium services. The difference? $2,000 monthly, had been redirected to her personal account for the past 3 months. She'd even filed claims with my long-term care insurance for services I wasn't receiving, pocketing the reimbursements. My retirement account from the hospital, which I'd carefully managed for 30 years, had been liquidated with penalties for early withdrawal. Sarah had used the power of attorney to override the protections I'd put in place. $60,000 meant for my final years gone. She'd told the financial advisor that I needed immediate funds for emergency medical treatment. The depth of her planning was staggering. She'd researched elder financial abuse laws, knowing exactly how much she could take without triggering federal investigations. She'd isolated me from my other children with stories of my declining mental health. She'd even convinced my neighbors at the old house that I'd voluntarily moved to memory care, ensuring no one would question the sale. David's business, I learned, had been failing for 2 years. They'd hidden massive debts, maxed out credit cards, taken private loans with devastating interest rates. My life savings hadn't been stolen out of greed. It had been devoured by their desperation. That night, alone in my small apartment with the truth laid bare before me, I fell apart completely. The walls I'd built to hold myself together through Roberto's death, through years of single parenthood, through countless hospital shifts where I'd witnessed human suffering, all crumbled at once. I found myself on the bathroom floor, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe, my chest feeling like it might crack open from the pain. The photo albums I'd pulled out lay scattered across my bed like crime scene evidence. There was Sarah at age 5, missing her front teeth, holding a bouquet of dandelions she'd picked for me, declaring them more beautiful than roses. There she was at 12, her arm around my waist at Roberto's funeral, whispering, "Don't worry, Mama, I'll take care of you." Every picture felt like a knife twisting deeper into my heart. I remembered the sacrifices with brutal clarity. The winter I went without a coat so Sarah could have her band uniform. The year I worked Christmas, New Year's, and every holiday in between to pay for her college applications. The night shifts I took, despite exhaustion, because they paid more, ensuring she could attend the good school across town instead of the rough one in our neighborhood. I'd eaten peanut butter sandwiches for lunch for 3 years, so she could buy the expensive textbooks for her pre-law classes before she switched to business. My wedding ring's absence felt like a phantom limb. I kept touching my naked finger, expecting to find the familiar band, only to remember it was gone, taken by the daughter I'd trusted most. Roberto had saved for 6 months to buy that ring, working overtime at the factory, hiding money in a coffee can above the refrigerator. "You deserve diamonds," he'd said when he proposed, "but this ring carries something better. All my love and every promise I'll ever make to you." Now it sat in Sarah's safe, waiting to be sold like common merchandise. The cruelest part was how she'd weaponized my love against me. Every hesitation I'd felt, every question I'd swallowed, had been silenced by that powerful maternal instinct to trust my child. She'd counted on that. She'd known I'd rather doubt myself than doubt her. The very love that had driven me to give her everything had made me the perfect victim. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but shame paralyzed me. How could I tell my friends that my own daughter had robbed me? How could I face my book club knowing they'd whisper about poor Thelma, betrayed by the child she'd raised? The humiliation felt almost worse than the financial loss. I'd spent my entire career as a competent, capable nurse, someone others relied on. Now I was just another foolish old woman who'd been scammed by a family member. Sleep was impossible. I wandered my tiny apartment like a ghost, picking up objects and setting them down, unable to focus. The teacup Roberto had given me for our first anniversary. The wooden cross my mother had carried from Mexico. The ceramic handprint Ashley had made in kindergarten. Everything felt tainted now, reminders of a family that had been an illusion. At 3 a.m, I found myself writing a letter to Roberto, something I hadn't done since the first year after his death. "Mi amor," I wrote, tears blurring the words. I failed. I raised a daughter who could do this. Where did I go wrong? What didn't I teach her? You always said I was too soft with her, too quick to forgive. Were you right? Is this my fault? The sunrise found me still awake, red-eyed and hollow. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. This 70-year-old woman with silver hair and deep lines earned through decades of hard living. I didn't recognize the broken person staring back at me. Sarah hadn't just stolen my money. She'd stolen my faith in the one thing I'd always believed in absolutely: the power of a mother's love to shape good children. My greatest achievement had become my greatest failure, and I didn't know how to live with that. The morning of the third day after my breakdown, I woke to find Harold standing at my door with a cup of coffee and a determined expression. He'd heard nothing from me for 48 hours and had convinced the facility manager to check on me. The sight of my apartment, tissues everywhere, photos scattered, me still in the same clothes, told him everything. "Thelma Martinez," he said firmly, setting the coffee on my table. "I've known you for 8 months, and this isn't you. The woman who worked double shifts for 30 years doesn't give up. Now drink this coffee and tell me what happened." Maybe it was his kindness, or maybe I'd simply run out of tears, but I found myself telling Harold everything. He listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "My son tried something similar with me 5 years ago," he said quietly. "Not to this extent, but he tried. You know what I learned? These vultures count on our silence. They count on our shame. They win because we're too embarrassed to fight back." His words sparked something in me, a tiny flame where there had been only ashes. That evening, I stood in front of Roberto's photo, the one from our 25th anniversary where he was laughing at something I'd said. I could almost hear his voice. "Mi amor, you survived my death, raised 3 kids alone, saved lives for 30 years. You're going to let this break you? No, my Thelma is a fighter." The flame grew stronger. I thought about the other residents at Sunset Gardens. How many might be victims of similar schemes? I thought about Mrs. Chen, whose son managed all her finances. I thought about Roger from the book club, who'd mentioned his nephew had been asking strange questions about his accounts. If I stayed silent, Sarah would face no consequences. Worse, she might do this to someone else. That night, I pulled out a fresh notebook and began writing everything down. Dates, amounts, conversations, every detail I could remember. My hand cramped after 2 hours, but I kept writing. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice, about showing my other children who their sister really was, about protecting others from experiencing this betrayal. I called Marcy first. "I need you to listen without interrupting," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in days. "Sarah has been lying to all of us." The conversation was painful, but Marcy's anger on my behalf gave me strength. She immediately started researching elder abuse attorneys in my area, her professional network as a marketing executive proving invaluable. Tom's reaction was equally swift. My quiet accountant son transformed into someone I'd never seen before, furious, protective, and tactical. "Mom, we're going to nail her to the wall," he said, his Boston accent thickening with emotion. "I know exactly which authorities to contact. She picked the wrong family to mess with." I made a decision that surprised me. I told the truth to others. First to Mrs. Patterson, who immediately offered to provide any facility records I needed for legal proceedings. Then to my book club, who rallied around me with a fierce protectiveness that brought fresh tears to my eyes. Even Margaret, the quiet librarian, offered to research legal precedents for elder financial abuse cases. The shame I'd expected never materialized. Instead, each person I told became another soldier in my army. The facility's social worker connected me with a support group for victims of elder abuse. The security guard James, whose grandmother had faced similar exploitation, offered to be a witness to any suspicious behavior he'd observed. Standing in my bathroom mirror that night, I saw someone different. Not a victim, not a broken old woman, but a survivor preparing for battle. I put on lipstick for the first time in days, the coral shade Roberto had always loved. "You want to fight, Sarah?" I said to my reflection. "You've got one." My plan began with finding the right lawyer, and Harold's connection proved invaluable. Catherine Walsh was a former prosecutor who'd specialized in elder abuse cases before entering private practice. She was 62 herself, with sharp green eyes and an even sharper mind. When I walked into her office with my notebook and box of evidence, she listened for 2 hours without interrupting, occasionally making notes in precise handwriting. "Mrs. Martinez," she said when I finished, "your daughter made several critical mistakes. First, she crossed state lines with wire transfers, making this federal. Second, the forged medical documents constitute healthcare fraud. Third, she involved your other children through deception, creating multiple counts of fraud. We're going to destroy her." Catherine's strategy was methodical and brilliant. Rather than immediately pursuing criminal charges, we would first gather irrefutable evidence. She connected me with a private investigator named Marcus Webb, a retired FBI agent who specialized in financial crimes. Within a week, Marcus had uncovered a treasure trove of information. Sarah had done this before to David's elderly aunt 3 years ago, though the family had been too ashamed to press charges. The facility's head nurse, Patricia, became an unexpected ally. She'd been suspicious of Sarah for months, noticing how she always visited during shift changes when oversight was minimal. Patricia had actually documented several instances of Sarah accessing my apartment when I was at medical appointments. She'd even taken photos of Sarah carrying boxes out of my room, thinking it strange, but not wanting to interfere without cause. I started recording everything. Tom had sent me a small digital recorder that looked like a pen, perfectly legal in our state for recording conversations I was part of. The next time Sarah called, trying to gaslight me about being confused, I captured every word. Her admission that she'd redistributed family assets for everyone's benefit would later prove damning in court. The most satisfying part of my plan involved the ring. I contacted the precious metals dealer Sarah had visited, explaining the situation. The elderly owner, Mr. Goldstein, was horrified. He remembered Sarah specifically because she'd seemed nervous, asking multiple times about their no questions asked policy. He immediately agreed to alert me if she attempted to sell the ring and to document everything for legal purposes. My son Tom flew in from Boston, taking a week off work to help build our case. His forensic accounting skills uncovered transactions we'd missed. Sarah had been skimming from my accounts for almost a year before the major thefts, small amounts that tested whether I was paying attention. She'd also opened credit cards in my name, running up $12,000 in debt I didn't know existed. The secret weapon came from an unexpected source: David. Marcus discovered that Sarah had been hiding money from her own husband, maintaining secret accounts he knew nothing about. She told David the money from my house went entirely toward their debts, but she'd kept nearly $100,000 for herself. When presented with this evidence, David's loyalty evaporated. He agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for immunity from prosecution. We scheduled the revelation for Thanksgiving, when the entire family would gather. Catherine advised me to invite everyone to Sunset Gardens for dinner, claiming I wanted to host one last family gathering in my new home. Sarah resisted at first, but Marcy and Tom's insistence made it impossible for her to refuse without looking suspicious. I had Mrs. Patterson arrange for security to be present, discreetly stationed outside my apartment. Catherine would be waiting in the manager's office with the police, ready to act on my signal. Mr. Goldstein had confirmed Sarah had called about selling the ring, scheduling an appointment for the Monday after Thanksgiving. The night before Thanksgiving, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my window watching the moon, spinning the silicone band I'd bought to replace my stolen ring. Tomorrow, Sarah would learn what happened when you underestimated Thelma Martinez. Tomorrow, justice would be served alongside the turkey. The trap was set, and my daughter was about to walk right into it. Thanksgiving arrived with unseasonably warm weather, the kind of November day that felt like nature itself was holding its breath. I'd been up since 4 in the morning, not from anxiety, but from purpose. Every dish was planned, every moment choreographed. The turkey was in the oven by 6, filling my small apartment with the familiar aroma that had defined 48 Thanksgivings before this one. Tom arrived first, flying in from Boston the night before, his presence steadying me. He helped me set the table with my good china, the set Roberto and I had received as a wedding gift that Sarah had somehow overlooked in her pillaging. Marcy came next, having driven through the night from Phoenix, her husband and teenage sons in tow. They brought flowers and wine, but more importantly, they brought their witness. The facility was buzzing with holiday energy. Other residents stopped by to wish me well, many knowing what was about to unfold. Harold positioned himself strategically in the common area with a clear view of my door, pretending to read a newspaper while actually serving as a lookout. Mrs. Patterson had the facility's security officer, James, doing routine rounds that happened to pass by my apartment every 15 minutes. Sarah arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, punctual as always, her family in tow. She swept in wearing an expensive new coat I recognized from the credit card statements, the ones in my name. Her confidence was absolute, her smile practiced. She'd even brought her famous green bean casserole, playing the perfect daughter to the end. "Mom, you look tired," she said, kissing my cheek with lips that felt like ice. "Are you sure you were up to cooking all this? You should have let me handle it." "I've been handling Thanksgiving dinner since before you were born," I replied, my voice steady. "I think I can manage one more." The tension in the room was electric, though Sarah seemed oblivious. David looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially me. He knew what was coming. Their 3 children, my grandchildren, chattered nervously, sensing something in the adults' behavior that made them uneasy. We went through the motions of family dinner. Tom carved the turkey while telling stories about his boys' hockey season. Marcy's sons talked about college applications. 8-year-old Emma showed me her missing tooth, and I gave her $1 from my purse, watching Sarah's eyes track the movement, probably calculating how much cash I had on me. Ashley, Sarah's oldest at 17, kept looking at her phone. "Mom, there's a package delivery guy outside who says he has something for Grandma. Should I let him in?" Sarah frowned. "You're not expecting anything, are you, Mom?" "Actually, I am," I said, standing slowly. "I've been expecting this for 2 weeks." The uniformed courier was actually Marcus Webb, the private investigator, playing his role perfectly. He handed me a small package, requiring signature confirmation. "Special delivery for Mrs. Thelma Martinez. Sign here, please." I signed with a steady hand, then returned to the dining table, placing the package beside my plate. Sarah's eyes were fixed on it, her knuckles white as she gripped her fork. "Aren't you going to open it?" Emma asked innocently. "In a moment, sweetheart. First, I want to tell you all a story about family, trust, and truth." I looked directly at Sarah. "It's a story about a ring that went on quite a journey." Sarah's face had gone pale. "Mom, this isn't the time." "Oh, but it is," I interrupted, my voice carrying 30 years of authority from commanding emergency rooms. "You see, 2 weeks ago, I received something very interesting. Something that changed everything." Tom subtly moved to block the door. Marcy pulled out her phone, ready to record. David put his head in his hands. "Go ahead, Sarah," I said, sliding the package across the table to her. "Open your mother's mail. You've been so good at managing my affairs lately. Don't stop now." Sarah's hands trembled as she tore open the package. Inside was my wedding ring, gleaming after being professionally cleaned, and wrapped around the band was a small piece of paper. The room held its breath as she unfolded it, her face draining of all remaining color as she read the words aloud in a whisper. "She's not your daughter. Ask about Patricia Coleman." The name hung in the air like a lightning strike. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, the ring clattering onto the table. "Where did you get this? Who sent this?" "That's interesting," I said calmly. picking up my ring and slipping it onto my finger where it belonged. That's the first true emotion I've seen from you in months. Now who is Patricia Coleman? This is ridiculous, Sarah stammered, but David suddenly stood up. Patricia Coleman was my aunt, David said, his voice hollow. The one who died 3 years ago. The one whose money mysteriously disappeared before her death. He turned to Sarah with dawning horror. You said the family spent it on her care. Tom pulled out his laptop, where he'd queued up the documentation Marcus Webb had uncovered. Patricia Coleman, aged 78, died in a nursing home in Delaware. Her estate of $200,000 was completely drained 6 months before her death. The signature on the power of attorney documents. He turned the screen toward everyone. Look familiar? The signature was identical to the one on my forged documents. But here's the interesting part, Marcy interjected, standing now. The note isn't really about Patricia Coleman. The note was my idea. We wanted you to panic, Sarah. We wanted you to show everyone who you really are. Sarah's mask finally shattered completely. You set me up. No, I said quietly. You set yourself up. We just made sure everyone could see it. At that moment, my phone rang on cue. I put it on speaker. It was Mr. Goldstein from the precious metals shop. Mrs. Martinez, I'm calling to confirm your daughter just left my store trying to sell your ring. As instructed, I told her I needed to verify its authenticity and asked her to return Monday. She seemed very eager to complete the sale. Thank you, Mr. Goldstein, I replied. But that wasn't my daughter. That was a thief. Sarah lunged for the door, but Tom was already there. Going somewhere, sis. You can't prove anything, she screamed. That's all circumstantial. I was managing Mom's affairs because she's not competent. Actually, Catherine Walsh said, entering the apartment with 2 police officers, we can prove everything. Your husband has been very cooperative. He's provided us with emails, texts, and recordings of you discussing your plans. You weren't as careful as you thought. David looked at Sarah with undisguised disgust. You told me Thelma agreed to everything. You said she wanted to help us. But you've been planning this for years, haven't you? First my aunt, then your own mother? The police officer stepped forward. Sarah Morrison, you're under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and theft. You have the right to remain silent. As the handcuffs clicked around Sarah's wrists, her children started crying. Ashley, the oldest, looked at me with confusion and pain. Grandma, what's happening? I knelt beside my grandchildren, my heart breaking for them. Your mom made some very bad choices, sweetheart. But this isn't your fault. You're always going to be my grandchildren, and I love you very much. Sarah turned as they led her away, her face twisted with rage. You're destroying your own family. You're choosing money over your daughter. No, Sarah, I said firmly. You chose money over your mother. I'm choosing justice over silence. The door closed behind them, and suddenly the apartment was quiet except for Emma's soft crying. The truth had been revealed, but victory tasted like ashes. My ring was back on my finger, but the weight of it had forever changed. The months following Sarah's arrest unfolded like a slow healing of a deep wound. The legal process was swift but thorough. Sarah pled guilty to multiple counts of elder abuse and fraud to avoid a longer sentence, receiving 5 years in federal prison with possibility of parole in 3. The judge, a stern woman named Harriet Crawford, made it clear during sentencing that Sarah's betrayal of her mother's trust was particularly heinous. You didn't steal from a stranger, Judge Crawford said, looking directly at Sarah. You systematically robbed the woman who gave you life, who sacrificed everything for your success. This court has seen many cases, but the cruelty of this betrayal stands out. The financial recovery was more successful than I dared hope. The house sale was reversed due to the fraudulent circumstances, though it took 4 months of legal battles. The elderly couple who'd bought it were understanding. Having experienced their own family struggles, they even sent me a card wishing me well. My savings were partially recovered through insurance and the sale of assets Sarah had purchased with stolen funds, including that new BMW and jewelry she'd bought for herself. David filed for divorce the week after Sarah's arrest. He brought the children to see me every Sunday, determined to maintain their relationship with their grandmother despite everything. He'd known nothing of Sarah's schemes and was devastated to learn about his Aunt Patricia. We developed an unexpected friendship born from shared betrayal. He was a good man who'd been deceived just as thoroughly as I had been. My relationship with Tom and Marcy grew stronger than ever. They took turns visiting monthly, and we instituted weekly video calls where we actually talked, not just exchanged pleasantries. The family Sarah had tried to destroy was rebuilding itself without her, perhaps even stronger for having survived the storm. The hardest part was helping my grandchildren understand. Ashley, at 17, was old enough to grasp the full scope of her mother's actions. She went through anger, denial, and finally, a sad acceptance. I found her a good therapist who specialized in family trauma. Marcus and Emma, younger and more resilient, adapted more quickly, though they sometimes asked when Mommy was coming home. I moved back into my house in March, 5 months after that terrible Thanksgiving. Harold helped me move, having become more than just a neighbor but a true friend. The house felt different, emptier somehow, but I slowly reclaimed it. I reframed family photos, keeping some of Sarah but moving them to less prominent places. I couldn't erase her from history, but I could choose how much space she occupied in my present. The support group for elder abuse victims became a cornerstone of my new life. I shared my story publicly, despite the embarrassment, hoping to help others recognize the warning signs. I learned I wasn't alone. 1 in 10 elderly Americans experience some form of elder abuse, most often by family members. We looked out for each other, these wounded but resilient survivors. I even returned to part-time work, not at the hospital, but as a consultant for a law firm specializing in elder abuse cases. My nursing background and personal experience made me uniquely qualified to spot medical fraud and forgeries. It gave me purpose beyond my own recovery. On the 1-year anniversary of Sarah's arrest, I visited her in prison. She looked older, harder, but also somehow smaller. We sat across from each other at a metal table, supervised by guards, 2 strangers who once shared everything. "I forgive you," I told her, meaning it. "Not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying hatred is too heavy at my age." She cried then, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in years. "I'm sorry, Mom. I got so lost. The debt, the pressure. I convinced myself you'd never notice, that it didn't matter." "It mattered," I said simply. "But you're still my daughter. That's the tragedy in all this. You're my daughter, and you always will be." I left the prison feeling lighter, my wedding ring catching the sunlight as I walked to my car, finally free. 2 years have passed since that Thanksgiving when my world shattered and rebuilt itself. I'm 70 now, still living in my house on Maple Street, still making cookies for new neighbors, still wearing Roberto's ring that once traveled such a dark journey before returning home. Some mornings I wake up and forget, just for a moment, that Sarah is in prison. Then reality settles back in like fog, and I remember that my firstborn, my helper, my responsible one, is serving time for trying to destroy me. I visit her once a month. We talk about safe things, the weather, books she's reading, the vegetable garden she tends in the prison yard. She's become the model prisoner, teaching literacy classes to other inmates, working in the library. The Sarah I see now seems more like the daughter I raised than the stranger who stole from me. Maybe prison saved her from becoming someone even worse. Maybe hitting bottom was the only way she could start climbing back up. David and the children have become the unexpected blessing in this tragedy. He remarried last year to a kind woman named Grace, who treats my grandchildren like her own. Ashley just started college, studying social work with a focus on elder advocacy. She says her grandmother inspired her. Marcus made the high school football team, and Emma still leaves drawings under my door every Sunday when they visit. They know their mother made terrible choices, but they also know she's still their mother. And I never let them forget that loving someone doesn't mean accepting their harmful actions. The money was mostly recovered, but I've learned it was never really about the money. It was about trust, the sacred bond between parent and child that should flow both ways. Sarah didn't just steal my savings, she stole my assumption that maternal love guaranteed protection from harm. She taught me that sometimes the ones we love most are capable of hurting us worst, precisely because we hand them the keys to our destruction when we hand them our hearts. I've become something of an advocate now, speaking at senior centers and community gatherings about recognizing the warning signs of elder financial abuse. The red flags I ignored: sudden interest in finances, isolation from other family members, rushed paperwork, stories that don't quite add up. These are universal warning signs. I tell my audience to trust but verify, to love but protect themselves, to remember that family bonds don't always mean family loyalty. My story often shocks people. How could a daughter do that to her own mother? They ask, as if sharing DNA creates an impenetrable force field against greed. But I've learned that when people are desperate, when they're drowning in debt and see their parents' savings as a life raft, they can convince themselves of anything. They tell themselves they deserve it, that they're owed it, that their parent would want them to have it. They transform from children into predators, and the elderly parent becomes prey. The saddest truth I've learned is that elder abuse thrives in silence and shame. Victims don't report because they're embarrassed, because they don't want to destroy their families, because they blame themselves for raising children capable of such betrayal. But silence is what allows these crimes to flourish. Every time I speak publicly about Sarah, every time I tell this story, I get emails from other victims finally finding the courage to seek help. Roberto once told me that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when life gets hard. Tom and Marcy showed up. Harold showed up. Even David, my former son-in-law, showed up. Family reconstituted itself around the empty space Sarah left, like healing tissue around a wound. So I ask you, what would you do if the person you trusted most became your greatest threat? Would you choose justice over silence? Would you have the courage to expose a child's betrayal? And perhaps more importantly, are you watching for the warning signs in your own family? Are you protecting your elderly parents, or are you assuming, like I did, that love is always enough? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you or someone you know experienced elder abuse? Let's start this conversation, because darkness grows in silence, but truth flourishes in the light. Like and subscribe if this story touched you, and remember, sometimes the hardest battles we fight are against the people we love most.